Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Yulia, Chief of Staff at Ecomap Technologies, and I'm thrilled to welcome you guys to Ecosystem Talks. Today, we're hosting a masterclass led by Paolo Gregory, a man of many titles and roles. He is the inventor of the Cohado model, an Afrofuturist collaborative tool for reimagining systems and relationships. He also serves as the founding steward for the Black Butterfly Network in Baltimore, seated as one of 4 entrepreneurship communities initiated by the Kauffman Foundation. This has resulted in the creation of the Black Butterfly Network and the Black Butterfly Exchange, an Ecomap platform that supports growing Black businesses and community development in Baltimore. Beyond those roles, Paolo is also a designer, facilitator, and community builder. His work spans cross-sector projects, engaging in community groups and governmental agencies. Paolo, we're so excited to have you today. Thank you so much for making the time.
It's wonderful to be here for sure. So,
Whenever you're ready, feel free to get started.
okay, awesome. Well, it's beautiful to be with this amazing organization, EcoMap, that's really helping to, I'll say, evolutionize ecosystem connectivity and how folks can really access resources. And I'll talk a little bit about our partnership with them. But let me just get started here by presenting this model. Can you see that?
Yes, looks great.
Awesome. So uh, a little tweak to the title because we're really I think often language has a huge amount of impact on what we see, and so I think there's often a lot of very masculine language like drive, and we let that out to see if we could call some brothers to the space. But it's really about lifting your ecosystem and your culture and working collaboratively to do that. I'll start by sharing a quote from Bell Hooks, who passed a couple of years ago. One of the most amazing evolutionaries I've experienced, and super cross cultural in so many dimensions. And when folks end up being multi-dimensional, as many ecosystem builders are, then they get to be in communities that not everyone gets access to. But what you do is you start to see how the differentiation of spaces is part of a much larger community. But you can't just annihilate the differentiation. You've got to really celebrate that. And so Bell Hooks says, beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation, by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world, which means that our differences are critical, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. A lot of this work is inspired from the Zulu culture in sub-Saharan Africa, what's now called South Africa. And the Zulu culture has a greeting, and the greeting is Sawubona, which means I see you, literally, I see you. And it's not like I see you, hey, what's going on? It's like I see the essence of who you are. And the response to Sawubona is Sakona, which means I am here, I am present. And many years ago, I had the blessing of doing a seminar, DEI seminar in Whitewater, Wisconsin. And Whitewater is a very interesting place. I had never been there. I landed, got a rental car, went into the town, and it was super cute town, all these houses. It looked like Pleasantville. And it felt like Pleasantville in a lot of ways. And as I went there, I didn't encounter any white folk, any black folks, or folks of color as I was walking around the town. I entered the University of Wisconsin Whitewater, where I was going to do this seminar. And it was a very interesting experience. When I walked in the door swung wide open on its own. And then I needed to find a restroom, just landed, went to the restroom, and the restroom door swung automatically open. And I had never encountered anything like that except in Switzerland, where the tech is way further along in some ways than ours. And what I learned as I moved around the space was that it is the most the most handicap accessible campus in the country. And so all of the tech was being used to create opportunities for other folks. And during that session, there was an audience, probably about 75 people or so. And there was only one person of color that I could see, who was sitting right in front of me. I was on a little stage. She was right in front of me, and she was wearing full African garb from head to toe and just looked absolutely stunning and, very queenly for sure. And so I started introducing this concept, which I had read in a book by, I think it was Peter Drucker. I didn't get this from my people. I got it from a white male business consultant. And in the book, it spoke of the word Ubuntu. And I didn't know how it was pronounced, so I said Ubuntu. And this woman approached me at the break, and she said the word is Ubuntu. And that was really an incredible nuance of the shift of vibe. And she said, there's another response when somebody says sawubona, and it's Sakona Noma Singeko. I asked her what that meant, and she said, it means I am here, but part of my spirit is missing. And Ubuntu requires you, if somebody responds that way, to remain with that person until their spirit is reunited with themselves. That could be 5 minutes. It could be the rest of your life. But that commitment of connecting and being part of community is what's the underlying fabric of that word, Ubuntu, which I translate to mean we're responsible for each other's well-being. And so I really see this notion of sawubona, seeing each other, really understanding the different perspectives that are in the space, as Bell Hooks suggested, as absolutely critical. And you can't do that unless you are fully present, unless you bring your full self to any situation. And in terms of Sakona Noma Singeko, I think we are living on a planet in this particular time that is present, but the spirit is missing. And that it is incumbent upon each of us to utilize our power, our connections, our connectivity, our insights, our relationships to bring that spirit back of community to every place that we go. And ideally, we do this planetarily. So I'm going to talk about the system that we're existing in. And this system is what I would describe as Sakona Noma Singeko. There's a structure that's been perpetrated across the entire planet in what I would describe as a Western masculine dominant paradigm. And it is really creating an incredible amount of waste, an incredible amount of suffering. And it's in every aspect of our societies, from the broader superstructures to our institutions, to our schools and faith institutions, all the way down to our families. And in order to work with this, in order to evolve this, we have to understand what it looks like. And when I initiated Cohado, it was actually during a dominoes game I was playing with a friend. I was visiting him in Minnesota, and he's a big dominoes player. And he's also, dominoes is interesting. The first sound of it is, it sounds like dominance. And that's really what that architecture is about. How do you dominate the others in that are playing in your space or in your ecosystem so that you know you're winning? And so during that game, I said, I just can't do this anymore because our creativity is being sapped and we're just put in this pit against each other kind of role with each other. And so I, early in my life, I had the opportunity my parents, I grew up in the 60s in the heat of the civil rights era. And in order to escape that heat, my parents drove me and my brother up to Montreal, Canada. And we went to the Montreal Expo in 1967. And when we arrived there, I saw this incredible structure that blew my mind, 250-foot in diameter dome that looked like it was floating on the ground. And I had never seen a structure anywhere like this in any way, shape, or form. And it turns out this structure was designed by Buckminster Fuller, who in that moment became like a distant mentor of mine. And Buckminster Fuller was really, I would call, an evolutionist. And he said, you never change things by fighting against the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And I think that's what EcoMap is trying to do. That's certainly what Cohado is trying to do. And the work that we do on the ground with the Black Butterfly and other initiatives are really inspired by this notion that we can burn all of our energy out by just fighting this toxic system. But we could also turn and start to cultivate some new forms of systems that actually are regenerative and flexible and open and collaborative. And so that really is the source of what we're trying to get done. So, as I said, to understand this, the models we want to create, we need to understand what the model is that we are turning away from. And the old operating system is very much like a pyramidic hierarchical structure. And as we know, triangles and the pyramids are very hard to change. And in hierarchical systems, the top is divided from the bottom. And then there's usually a secondary position put there to distance the bottom from the top. In societal systems, that is often in slavery, that was the overseer. In the contemporary times, it's policing. In corporate models, it's that middle management state. In communities, it's the suburbs and gated communities, but it all follows the same pattern. And the pattern looks like this. It is a hierarchy, and then the subsections of that are also divided. And you've heard the term divide and conquer. This is the model that does that. There are folks at the top who are extracting resources from the bottom, concentrating them to the top. And there are also then replicating that same hierarchical model to divide each of the sections so that they cannot aggregate power. Because you see, the top is much smaller than the rest of the pyramid. It's like an iceberg. There's way more under that water line than there is above the water line. And as we look at these systems, we can see that that same thing is happening at every level. I worked in East Baltimore many years ago, and there were community associations, tons of them. And there were folks who were heads of these community organizations who would be in relationship, would be, in a sense, the gatekeepers that connected to the resources of the foundations, et cetera, et cetera. And they would fly to Aspen, Colorado to get trained, et cetera. And they would bring that knowledge back and they would contain that knowledge. And in a sense, I called that the glass floor. And it's happening even when folks are working desperately to solve community problems. These same systems seem to replicate where there's a division of what's at the top from what's at the bottom. Now, what's at the top holds the resources, and there's a ton of capital. There's a clear view. You can see a long distance from the top of the hill. And there's also a sense of control that you get from that high position. And as I said, the resources are extracted from the bottom, which is doing the work, which is creating the assets, which are cultivating, whatever is being capitalized to bring it to the top. And in the middle, there's this barrier that separates those two spaces, so that the bottom cannot challenge the top, and it creates incredible waste. But what we see is that we know the assets at the top. We hear about it every day, and we also know the pain that's at the bottom of the pyramid. We read about that every day. But what we don't talk about is what are the assets that are developed at the bottom as a result of this model, and what's the pain at the top. And I would describe the assets at the bottom as also 3 C words. The first is, if you can't get things done yourself because you don't have the resources, then you've got to do it in community. So there's an incredible capacity for community development and community organizing that it is required. It's not even desired, it's just critical to survival, because you can't survive as an individual. The second thing is, if you don't have enough resources, even with your community, to buy or acquire what you need to live, then you start creating those things. So there's this incredible capacity for creativity that's at the bottom. And the third thing I would say is that there's this connection to spirit that you find in most indigenous cultures, in most cultures that exist at this, because even with the community and even with the creativity, it's still not enough. And so folk need to reach to what I would call the creative force, the creator, beyond themselves to be able to survive. And that reach is real. It's not a fictitious thing. And so you have this incredible asset. But at the top, if you think about it, all that concentration of wealth and resource makes you have this competitive stance to everything around you. Even your family, even your closest relations become transactional, and you don't know you're winning unless you see an incredible amount of loss on the other side, because you're measuring your viability in relationship to or in opposition to others, not as part of a whole. So this is really depressing. It creates incredible waste. it creates, because you're making, as in dominoes, you're making everyone waste everything in their hands so that you can measure your own capacity of winning by doing that, because you don't know you're winning unless you see folks are doing worse than you. But there's another way to look at this system, because if we look at these 3 points, which I would call the margins of this pyramid, there's incredible pain in all of those, and there's also incredible capacity. But what you find on the bottom is not part of the top, because you can't have community and individualism existing in the same space. That doesn't work. And what you find at the top is not at the bottom. That sense of agency and that sense of access to capital and resources isn't there. But if we look at this model and we begin to see it in a slightly different way, let's see, I'm not seeing here we go. If you see it in a slightly different way, you realize that each of those points at the margins are only one step away from the middle. And if we begin to fold this pyramid to the center, we create a well where those resources can combine. And then we can replicate that model over and over and create a web of differentiated but distributed resources where each of those points of conversion are places where resources can get passed and moved rather than concentrated in a hierarchical. So it moves that hierarchy into a distributed model. And this is the new model we're working to create. And we call this model Cohado. And this model actually was born out of that work of diversity, really looking at how we evolve this system into one that's distributed. And it's not tearing it down, it's just utilizing the assets of that system to expand and dimensionalize the resources so that we can all access what's needed. So fundamentally, this requires a shift. And the shift is looking at the idea of oneness as not an individual notion, a small idea of oneness, but a collective idea of oneness. It's the same word, it's just a pivot, a tiny movement towards the tipping point of understanding that we are all connected and that this is Ubuntu, and we are responsible for each other's well-being. Cesar Chavez said, "We cannot seek achievement ourselves and forget about progress and prosperity for community. Our ambitions must be broad enough to include the aspirations and needs of the others for their sakes and for our own." And again, this is the fundamental notion of Ubuntu, which is the inspiration under all of this model and all of this work. So, and this is really, we hear a lot about regenerative thinking, but this is regeneration because it means that as we come together, we're creating new possibilities, new things, and those new possibilities and new things become additive, and it takes us out of this zero-sum win-lose into a plus-sum mentality where you and me is 1 + 1 really dimensionalizes into 3. There's new things that are created. So it's additive and regenerative thinking and modeling. And this is Cohado. This was a game that came out of instantly out of that dominoes game I was playing, but has been cultivated as a way to model how we can be in relationship with each other. And I'm going to walk you a little bit through what these symbols mean. Each of the symbols is actually a principle, and those principles combine into a strategic process, which is what we use to design ecosystems and support ecosystem development. But the goal here, these are exactly like domino pieces. They're each doubled, and in this system, it goes from 0 to 7, but dominoes is 0 to 6, but it's the same structure. It's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's every permutation of those 7 symbols. And I'll walk you through this with a little bit of a mythic story so you understand what the myth and the philosophy is underlying this. So before there was anything, everything was everything. And therefore everything was nothing. And this is the 0. It's pre-Big Bang, pre-Turtle Island, pre-creation, whatever form of the universe you're thinking about. It was before there was anything. And so everything was everything. And she was cool with that because what else? There was nothing else to not be cool with. So you're going to be cool with the everythingness. Now, a thought trace emerged in this everythingness, which was a question. And the question was, what am I? Because you can't see yourself if you're everything, because there's nothing to perceive you. And this is the one. It's the I, it's our individual viewpoint. It's what each of us have as what I call a soul print. And it's our operating system. And everything in the universe has a viewpoint that's calling back to the 0. This is what you are when you're Palo. This is what you are when you're a table or a piece of wood or a star or a quark or a string. But we have the same challenge as individuals that the 0 has because we cannot see ourselves. And so we need others. And that's the yin and the yang. These are two faces looking at each other. It is the sawubona and the sakona. It is the up, the down, the in, the out, the binary. And it is that mirror which allows us to see others and share with our perspective of who they are so they can then see themselves and vice versa. And that's the 2. Now, when you put any 2 things together, a third thing emerges. And you can see the 2 faces here opening up into something else. And that's creativity. It's the womb. It's the birthplace. It's inception. It is the new thing. It is the 3, the 1 + 1 that equals 3, that creates the possibility for new ideas and new ways of being. Now, we call those first 4 dimensions the foundation, and they're givens. But in order to move anything, as we said, the 3 is this triangular structure that does not move. We need to evolve that structure to the 4. And the 4 is like the 4 chambers of your heart that move your blood around the body so that you can stick your finger with a pin and that blood will show up because of the incredible system of movement and circulation that represents. And that's modeled not only within our hearts, but it's modeled within the 4 seasons that move the resources around the planet to create the ability for life to grow. It's also modeled in the structure of the solar system and the 4 axes of the solar system in which all of these planets move and evolve around. It is structures that promote circulation and by that regeneration. Now, when you have all that, the question is, what are you going to do with that? And so the 5 is like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. You can see the head, the arms, and the legs here. It's not quite as nice a drawing as Da Vinci's, but you get the point. It's also our 5 fingers, and in Latin, our hand is mano, and mano is about manifestation. It's about putting our hands in the ground and implementing, manifesting what it is that we have conceived of through this process of development. And as we do that, we start to weave a web. And this web is the six. And the six is like the wireframe of the universe. It's as if the universe was this windshield and a stone hit it, and you can see all the fractalized pieces of glass that form the whole thing. And it literally is a web, very similar to the World Wide Web. And the web is our connectivity to each other. And we can either weave that web together, or we can tear that web apart and fragment those pieces. And I see it as our role as humans, and particularly ecosystem builders, to do that web weaving, to connect these disparate pieces together so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, that we are actually generating and regenerating new things and new capacities, and that we're not playing a zero-sum game. We're playing a plus-sum game. And if we do this well together, we get as close as we can to the seven. And the seven is really the result of all of this work. And if we look at the seven, the zero is like the white light as it is in its natural form. And the 1 through 6 is like a prism of time and space that allows us to see all of these constituent pieces. It's still made of the same matter, the same light stream that the 0 is, but it's broken up so that we can experience each other and see the diversity that we have present. And the 7 is the resulting answer to the question of what am I? The 7 is, this is what you all are in all of your constituent and spectral wonderfulness if we work together instead of working against each other. And so the goal is that we need to simply maximize assets by connecting our pieces together and minimize waste. And we minimize waste by leaving nothing hanging. And this is sort of the root of the game. If you connect 3 pieces, you get to that creative, and you can count that, right? You can count, you see these 3 6s and these 3 5s and these 3 4s are all activated. So they add to the sum of our game. You see the 2 pieces, the things that are just in pairs, they aren't activated yet. So they do not add, but they don't subtract because they're at least connected. So you see those 2 2s at the bottom and those 2 3s in the upper right. And then you see this 1 hanging. The goal is we don't leave anyone or anything in our ecosystems, our communities, our families. We don't leave anyone hanging because that counts as a negative number and it draws our score down and creates waste. And that is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So we have to then find those hanging pieces, find those unactivated pieces, and roll them into the community. So if there are any questions at this point, we're going to transition to looking at how this manifests in actual ecosystem work. But before we do that, I can't see if there's any questions, but do we have anything hanging in the space? I can see one thing. Let me stop share real quick here. For some reason, I can't. There we are, stop share. Oh, it says feel free to continue. Okay, awesome. So I'll share again. Okay. So this is how the structure looks as a model. So we begin with zero, and the zero is what is it that we're trying to get done together? What is the question that we're trying to answer? The one is what are our individual viewpoints, the diverse viewpoints we have on that question? And we need to get those out so that we can really hear and see each other and see each other's perspectives. Because difference, as we said, is the answer, not the problem. So as we begin to get those individual viewpoints, then we can begin to envision together. We start to connect and understand each other's perspectives. And in many practices, we use the Venn diagram as a model. And usually what happens is our focus goes to where we are in agreement and we ignore where we are in disagreement. We ignore the wings of the butterfly, as it were, and focus on that core because it's going to be less turbulent if we focus on where we agree. But that also automatically means that we are replicating everything that we've done before because there's no different viewpoints allowed into that space. But as we have these conversations and understand each other, the critical goal is to move into this space of three where we are hearing each other to the point where we can articulate each other's viewpoints accurately. And then what happens is we start to see new possibilities emerge. You have your idea and I have mine. If we put them together, then a third idea will emerge that will then create a new process for us to implement or a new possibility. And then we build structures around these new ideas, which creates new models of what we're doing. We then implement those models in the five by manifesting them. And then we elevate and expand those into the community to weave that fabric and expand the circle, which then leads us to a new point of view in which we can reflect back on what's been accomplished and what's been created. And that becomes our new zero because we're now in a new place with new assets and new resources. So we then keep iterating the same process over and over again. And this is that regenerative model. And the model we use to steward regeneration becomes our new DNA. We are actually changing the way things are done. So I'm going to shift now to the Black Butterfly Network and show you how we utilize this to evolve this network. So first, we had to understand the context in Baltimore, and our focus for this project was to support Black businesses in Baltimore, the Black ecosystem, because it's marginalized, it doesn't have access to the resources, which is shown in this slide. If we look at the slide on the left, we said, okay, where's all the money for startups coming from? And if you look at the large circle, it's personal and family savings of the owners. That's 64%. And then we go to the next, and that's 11%, totaling 75%. And that's personal credit or credit card, so access to credit. And if we go down, we'll see everything is either connected to those two circles, meaning if families have access to business credit, then you can step into getting resources from banks directly into the business rather than personal capital. And then you go further and you see that it's business investment, like there's investment from family and friends, and then other resources in the 1% range or government and venture capital is 1%. This is money that is going to startups. If we look at Baltimore, the black butterfly was articulated by Lawrence Bell. Those darker pink areas to the red areas are the highest concentrations of black folks in Baltimore, and they are also this particular map looks at percentage of unemployment. And so if you have marginalized employment, you're not going to have family capital, you're not going to have access to credit capital, et cetera. And you're certainly not going to be in line for venture capital, which means you have like zero resources to start a business. We discovered that 80% of businesses in Baltimore failed, black businesses failed within the first 18 months. And the reason articulated was because of this access to capital. That's not the whole picture, as we discovered. So we started the work to identify what we wanted to do. And we pulled together a council of diverse folks. A lot of the folks were entrepreneurs or folks who created and supported entrepreneurs through ESOs, and they were all ecosystem builders. And ecosystem builders are those spiders that move about the web, who weave those connections, but they also have relationships and connections in a broad, diverse set of cultures, which is what makes them incredibly valuable to this building. And they're also often transparent because they're not putting themselves out front. They're doing this work behind the scenes. And Faye Horwood of Forward Cities was working with us, and she led the first level zero to articulate the question that we were trying to ask. And that question was, how will we cultivate the creativity, innovation, and leadership of Black Baltimore as a model for thriving, equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems of the future? And that question really spawned huge dialogue. And so we went to the council members and we said, okay, what are each of your perspectives on this? And we did a video documentation of each of the perspectives of these members on this question. And you can find that at bemoreforward.com if you're interested in digging into these interviews, which were really revealing. And there were a lot of differences, but there was a lot of crossover. So we looked to incorporate that. Then we stepped to level 2 and we said, okay, what are the relationships of the folks in this council? How do they know each other? And the heavy lines are solid relationships, talk regularly. The lighter lines are more fragile or more new relationships. But we got them to start to articulate the nature of their relationships and started to have conversations across these. And out of these conversations came this notion of looking at the black butterfly. That image that you saw was actually research developed by Lawrence Brown, Dr. Lawrence Brown, who then and is now also at Morgan. And we decided to launch this network and asked for Lawrence Brown's blessing to utilize this moniker of Black Butterfly, which he articulated as the east and west sides of Baltimore. And so that's the birth of the Black Butterfly Network. And so what we learned by going out into the community and having conversations is that there were 3 areas that were critical. We kept hearing 3 things over and over. One, that this work needed to be grounded in the communities that were struggling. The east and west side of Baltimore, south side of Baltimore, and the pockets of where poverty is high. So that's that sense of place. It needs to be anchored in place. And the second thing we heard, and this was happening during COVID, we went out to the entrepreneurs' businesses, focusing on retailers and restaurants to see what their experience was. And they all articulated that they felt isolated. They were not able to connect with each other, and they didn't feel connected to the broader system. And the third thing they said was that they felt like they didn't have access to any of the resources or information or capital or other things that white founders had access to. And so what we did was create a structure that had this model where we were grounded in the community, and we focused on ground level businesses first, that we created a cohort structure to connect them to each other. And we evolved the platform in partnership with EcoMap to get those resources accessed by this community through the platform so that they could get this information as soon as it was coming rather than when it was too late. And so this is, I'm not going to play this whole video, but we'll see if we can get a little bit of it. Is this audible?
It is not, unfortunately.
Okay, I got the word that you can't hear this, but you can access this information on our website, blackbutterfly.network, and that will also bridge you to the blackbutterfly.exchange. And it's BLKBTRFLY in both of those instances. So we utilize this same model to design the cohort experience. So rather than focusing on individual founders, what we said was we're focusing on building the community of founders and a community of entrepreneurs and business owners. And so we created a training program, and the training program was an 8-week program which utilized the 15 to 20 participants as the group of study of how do we connect them to each other by moving them through this same cycle. And they gathered at the zero. We had them talking to each other about their own individual perspectives and experiences. We had them start to really understand each other through exchange. And then towards the end of the program, they started to generate ideas of things that could be done, and then move those ideas into reality. A concrete example of that is our 4th cohort, which just graduated a couple of months ago, said they wanted to utilize the resources that they had as a cohort community to create a Black Butterfly experience, which has a vendor fair, which allows them to share their experiences, but it also incorporates workshops and conversations and dialogues and master sessions that can engage the community of both entrepreneurs and the broader community in conversations about how do we support the movement and evolution of this work. And each week touched on one of these one of these models. So the first week was a 0, the second week the 1, and the third week, and so on. And what we learned from those folks, and I'll just read, I'll read one of these. I'll pick Debonette's. These were our first cohort members, and this was what we learned from them. Debonette said, "One thing I love about this cohort is the ability to be transparent. We need each other, and you need a safe place to be able to tell your story and for people to be able to hear your story. After 5 minutes of talking, you realize, girl, me too. It's okay to be authentic in this space, in the safe space. So really speak your truth. Not speaking your truth could mean life or death, and we are all about life." And we've heard these same kinds of things consistently from the 60 members of the Black Butterfly community who have been through the cohort process. And the second thing, as I said, we did was worked with EcoMap to develop the Black Butterfly Exchange, which is a powerful tool using the AI resources that they innovated to scrape the web to make sure that access to loan funds and opportunities and training and all the things that you need are right at your hands, as well as access to events and news and information that's relevant to you and the community. And I really look at EcoMap as the hardware of this ecosystem building, and that the Black Butterfly is the wetware, the community, the people, the connectivity, and the ground game that enables this work to get done. And you need that. And the third thing you need is capital. And that's really the next vantage that we need to access. And we're working diligently to find access to capital. But what I'll say is that I mentioned that 80% of Black businesses in Baltimore fail within the first 18 months. We've just analyzed our 60 members, and we've been up and running for about 2.5 years now. And we've only lost one business, which means we're at 98% retention of these businesses. And folks ask, well, what do we account for that? Number one, Black folk are communal. And when communal people feel isolated, it is a much, much more difficult experience. And so if you picture yourself as a Black founder and you are experiencing the ups and downs that all startups experience, but you don't have capital to reach for, as we said, to solve those problems, to pay for somebody to help you figure out your books or to put in a POS system or whatever it is that you need. And so you're there on your own. Often your family doesn't even understand what you're doing because they haven't had the experience of owning their own businesses, etc. So you're incredibly isolated. You're in a down period. Things aren't going the way you thought. And your anxiety grows, and there's nothing to do with that anxiety. And then the bills mount and your anxiety increases. And as that happens, then your anxiety gets to the point where you say, I can't do this anymore. But what we've seen is when folks have experienced that, who definitely experienced it as cohort members, they can drop into this network and do so on a really daily basis, connecting with each other. And they'll say, hey, I'm struggling with my bank. I can't get this or that. And somebody says, oh, I went through that last year. Let me tell you what I did to get through that situation. And therefore, you're not alone. And you feel that you not only have like 1 or 2 folks, but you have 59 other folks that you can touch into to access the resources you need to continue your work. And so what's next for us? and I'm moving back to Cohado and the ecosystem work. So we've just we're in. These are the proofs of a new Cohado game that we can mass produce. The first sets we produced were handmade here in Baltimore out of pewter at a jeweler's, and the boxes were made at Open Works out of bamboo, and they were $2,500 a piece. And we made 50 of them, and we sold out of those, which proved to us that there's something valuable here. And now we're producing sets that'll be under $200, $175, still metal, still beautiful, incredible, and these are coming this summer. We've also launched a virtual version of Cohado where you can play multiplayer, internalized video and audio like we are in this Zoom space, and that you can connect with each other and play this, experience this collaborative space where you can get what the executive director of the Buckminster Fuller articulated as the most embodied experience of collaboration that she had ever had in the early proof of this virtual game, which is phenomenal. It really is, and it's up and running, and we're beta testing now. And then the last thing I want to let you know is that we will be doing a Cohado challenge that's being launched at the Spring Summit, where ecosystems can now work together across the country to build their ecosystem. And that's happening April 30th through May 2nd. And we're doing a big Cohado session there. And then there will be a training where you can go into your ecosystem and experience this work and apply this work in your own ecosystems. So thank you very much. And it is a blessing to be here. I saw Maria come in. So welcome, Maria.
Hi. Thank you so much, Paolo. That was such a great presentation, super insightful. I think we have a couple questions in the chat if we want to start with those real quick.
Sure.
I
Can you
read
call
them.
those out?
So the first question we have is, can you share real world examples of how the Black Butterfly Network has utilized the Cohado model to achieve its goals?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll give you one concrete example. I know we're pressed up against our time boundary. So in the first cohort, we had Cashew Creamery, which is an amazing plant-based ice cream shop here in Baltimore that's trying to expand. Dwight called me. Dwight is the co-founder. He called me about a month after the cohort ended, which was in January. And he said, I got this amazing opportunity. Whole Foods called me. They said, we want to carry your ice cream. How much can you produce in a 2-week period? He knows his numbers. He told them exactly what he could produce. A week later, he got a purchase order for twice what he could produce in the same amount of time. That's some of the pressure testing that often marginalized folks get because people don't think they're going to be able to step up to the game. And Dwight said, I can produce what they ordered, but I only have 50 cubic feet of freezer space, and I can't store it to get that order shipped in a single round. He said, you know anybody with some freezers? And I said, why don't you throw it out to the network? We have everybody in the network on a group me thread. He hit me back. He said, I threw it out to the network. 3 minutes later, Ice Queens in Locust Point hit me, said, come visit. They went, looked at the freezer space. Ice Queen said, this is February. We're not going to be selling ice cream until March or April. You can use our freezer space. And he said, how much do you want for that? And she said, you're a butterfly. You're not getting charged. He fulfilled that PO and is now in countless Whole Foods. And he would not have gotten that bite at that apple again if he couldn't deliver on the first one. And that's just one example. There's hundreds of examples, but that's a poignant one.
Thank you. Yeah, we're definitely huge fans of Kaju here as well, and definitely a great success story with the Cohado model and Black Butterfly coming together. Last question, I know we're approaching time, but how can the Cohado model be applied to address specific challenges within an existing community or ecosystem? I know you kind of touched on this a bit already, so feel free to address that however.
Yeah, so I mean, really, any challenge that you have that you're trying to deal with collaboratively, the process very naturally unfolds in terms of making sure that you bring the people who are experiencing the challenge into defining the question or the problem that you're trying to solve. If you're doing that at a table in a conference room somewhere that the folks aren't engaged, then you're not going to ever get to those new answers. But if you can form that question and then move through that process collaboratively, the impact and the results are totally unpredictable and often yield new innovation that can even scale whatever it is you're doing. And that can be a problem like an event, or it can be a problem like the globe right now. I think we need to start bringing some folks into this to solve some of these larger issues. But yeah, it's just moving through the model.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paolo. I think those are all of our questions. Thank you so much for joining us and for taking the time today. Make sure to stay connected with Paolo online on LinkedIn, through the Black Butterfly Eco Map. And yeah, thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, Paolo.
And thank you, EcoMap folks, for the work you do here in Baltimore as your root zone, and really all over the country. And I look forward to seeing you all in Shenandoah for the Startup Champions Network, and invite everyone to come out to that to really experience this and start to connect with some of the other ecosystem builders around the country.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Okay.